I was holding her key when I realized the door behind her wasn't the one it belonged to anymore. She stood there barefoot on the hallway tile, apologizing too quickly, reaching out and then stopping, like touch had consequences we hadn't agreed on yet. The lock clicked when she tested it. Wrong sound. She looked at me then, really looked, and something in her face tightened. Not fear, not surprise, but recognition. The kind that arrives late. I felt it too. That quiet certainty that whatever this small favor was supposed to be, it had already failed. I handed her the key anyway. When our fingers brushed, she whispered, "That door led," and didn't finish. The hallway felt suddenly too narrow for the years that rushed in all at once. Before that evening, she was just the woman across the hall. We shared a wall and very little else. A polite nod in the mornings, the faint sound of her radio through the vent late at night. Packages occasionally left by mistake in front of the wrong door. The kind of proximity that feels temporary, even when it isn't. My life at that point was settled in a way that looked intentional from the outside. I had moved into the building after a divorce that didn't end loudly, just conclusively. We split things evenly. Books, furniture, silence. I chose the apartment because it was close to work, and because nothing about it asked questions. One bedroom, neutral paint, a place designed for containment. She moved in a few months after me. I noticed because the hallway smelled like fresh cardboard for days. I heard the scrape of furniture, the quiet frustration of someone assembling things alone. I offered help once, holding the door while she carried in a lamp. She thanked me, smiled, said she was almost done anyway. That was the rhythm we found. Near, but not involved. Over time, I learned her schedule without trying to. She left early, came back late. Sometimes with grocery bags, sometimes with nothing at all. She wore different versions of tired. There was a softness to her that felt practiced, like she had learned how to make exhaustion look polite. We spoke more in fragments than conversations, complaints about the building's heat, a brief exchange about a leak in the laundry room. Once, during a power outage, we stood in the hallway with candles, laughing quietly at how dramatic it felt for something so minor. When the lights came back on, we both retreated without comment. I never asked where she was from. She never asked about my past. It was an unspoken agreement. History stayed on our respective sides of the wall. The day I found the key, it was lying just outside the front entrance, half hidden near the mat. Old brass, slightly bent. I recognized it immediately because I'd seen it once before, dangling from her hand as she fumbled for her phone. I picked it up without hesitation. No calculation. Just the neighborly thing to do. I didn't know then that returning it wouldn't be an errand. It would be an opening. I knocked once. Then again, softer. I could hear movement inside before she opened the door. A drawer closing. Footsteps that paused, then resumed. When she finally turned the lock, she opened it only part way, like she needed a second to decide who she was going to be. "Yes?" she said, already apologetic. I held up the key. "You dropped this downstairs." Her face changed immediately. Not relief. Something more complicated. She reached for it, then stopped herself, fingers hovering in the air between us. "I didn't even realize," she said. "Thank you." She took it, turning it over in her palm like it might explain itself. The door behind her creaked slightly as she leaned back against it. And that's when I noticed it wasn't fully shut. A sliver of her apartment, visible. Dim light. Shoes by the wall. A bag packed and resting upright like it had been waiting. "You moving out?" I asked before I could stop myself. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Something like that." There was a pause. One of those pauses that feels heavier than conversation. She glanced down the hallway, then back at me, as if checking for witnesses to something neither of us had named. "That key," she said slowly, "doesn't actually open this door anymore." I laughed, assuming a joke. "That sounds inconvenient." "It is," she said. Then, after a beat, "It opens another place. One I haven't been to in a long time." The way she said it made the hallway feel suddenly borrowed, like we were standing in a space meant to funnel people past each other, not let them stop. She took a breath. "I was supposed to return it today. I keep postponing." That word landed harder than it should have. Postponing. I knew it too well. "Do you want me to leave it with you?" I asked. "Or—" She looked at the key again, then back at me. "No. You did what you were supposed to." She stepped back and opened the door wider. Not an invitation. Just room enough for honesty. "I didn't lose it by accident," she said. "I dropped it because part of me didn't want to carry it anymore." I nodded, even though I didn't understand yet. I could feel something shifting, the way balance changes just before a fall. She met my eyes then, steady, almost resigned. "You were meant to find it." That was the moment the favor ended, and the story stopped being about a key. After that, things didn't move forward. They widened. She didn't invite me in. I didn't ask. We stood in the hallway longer than necessary, both aware that time was doing something irreversible without our permission. The bag behind her stayed where it was. The door remained open just enough to admit consequence. She told me, in pieces, about the place the key belonged to. Not an address. A life. One she had stepped away from quietly, without breaking anything on the way out. A relationship that still technically existed, because neither of them had said the words that would end it cleanly. Distance had been doing the work instead. "I keep telling myself I'll go back just to finish the conversation," she said, "just to close the door." I understood that logic immediately. It's a convincing one. It promises resolution without disruption. The days that followed, we began to talk more, not dramatically, in the elevator, by the mailboxes, short exchanges that lingered after they ended. She never mentioned the key again, but it was there, between us, unspoken. I started noticing the small things, how she hesitated before unlocking her own door now, like the mechanism required permission, how the packed bag stayed by the wall longer than it should have, how sometimes, late at night, I heard her walking back and forth instead of settling into sleep. I told myself I was just being observant, a neighbor, nothing more. But the truth was, I was already adjusting my routines to run into her, leaving a little earlier, coming back a little later. Pretending coincidence could excuse intention. One evening, she knocked on my door instead. She didn't say why, just stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee, already cooling. "I didn't want to drink this alone," she said. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, careful with space, careful with tone. She talked about work, about how strange it felt to live somewhere that hadn't known her before. I listened in the way you listen when you're hoping not to be noticed listening too closely. When she stood to leave, she stopped near the door. Her hand brushed the wall, grounding herself. "I think I'm running out of time," she said. "For what?" I asked. She didn't answer, just smiled, tired and honest. "For pretending this is neutral." After she left, I stood in my apartment longer than necessary, staring at my own door. I thought about the key, about how easy it is to convince yourself you're not responsible when you're only standing nearby. That night, I understood something I hadn't wanted to before. This wasn't drifting, it was approaching. She knocked late. Not late enough to be reckless, but late enough to mean she'd been thinking about it all evening. I opened the door and knew immediately this wasn't a visit. It was a decision. She didn't step inside. She held the key out between us, flat on her palm, like an offering she no longer wanted to negotiate with. Her coat was on. The bag was gone from behind her door. That absence said more than anything she could have explained. "I went back," she said. "I used it." I waited. My chest felt tight, but steady. Whatever was coming, it had already been chosen. "I opened the door," she continued, "and I understood why I'd left." She looked up at me then, really looked. The hallway light caught the lines of fatigue she usually softened with smiles. There was relief there now. And grief. They weren't fighting each other anymore. "I told the truth," she said. "All of it. I didn't stay." The key trembled slightly in her hand. Not doubt. Aftershock. "I can't keep doors open just so I don't feel guilty," she said. "And I can't pretend you're just a neighbor." I didn't move. If I reached for the key too quickly, it would feel like claiming something that hadn't been released yet. "So, this is you choosing?" I asked. She nodded once. Small. Final. "Yes." I took the key. Not as a symbol. As an acceptance of weight. Of consequence. When our fingers touched this time, neither of us pulled away. Down the hall, a door closed. Someone laughed. Life asserting its indifference. She stepped forward then, just enough that the space between us disappeared without ceremony. Her forehead rested against my shoulder. No kiss. No promise. Just contact that didn't lie. "I don't know where this leads," she said. "I do," I answered quietly. "It leads forward." She exhaled, long and unguarded, and in that narrow hallway, with a key that no longer opened any other door, something irreversible finally locked into place. I didn't see her the next morning, or the one after that. The hallway went back to being a hallway. Neutral, uninvolved. The kind of space that pretends nothing important ever happens there. I noticed the absence in small ways, the silence outside my door, the lack of footfalls that used to pass at certain hours. Choice has a sound when it leaves. When I did see her again, it wasn't dramatic. She was carrying groceries. I was checking the mail. We smiled, the way people do when something private has already been agreed upon. No urgency, no secrecy. Just a shared understanding that time had shifted direction. We didn't rush into anything. That mattered to both of us. What she had closed needed to stay closed. What we were beginning needed room, to be honest. Sometimes we sat in silence and let that be enough. Sometimes we talked late and stopped before the words got ahead of the truth. I never asked what was said behind that other door. I didn't need the details. The weight of the key was gone now. It stayed in a drawer, not as a reminder, but as proof that endings can be deliberate. Living across the hall from someone changes how you understand intimacy. You learn restraint. You learn patience. You learn that closeness doesn't have to announce itself loudly to be real. Eventually, the hallway stopped feeling narrow, not because it changed, but because we did. And every time I lock my door now, I think about how easily a small act can redirect a life, how returning something lost can become an entrance, if both people are willing to step through without pretending it's accidental. Some doors close quietly. The ones that matter most always do. I didn't keep the key. Not because it hurt to look at it, but because it had finished its work. Objects like that don't belong to the future. They belong to the moment they force. What remained was quieter, more practical. We learned each other in the margins of ordinary days, shared dinners that didn't try to prove anything, conversations that stopped before they turned into promises. We let time do what it should have done earlier, test us without deception. Sometimes I'd catch her standing in the hallway, keys in hand, thinking, not about leaving, about how easily a life can be misfiled if no one insists on clarity. She told me once that losing the key had felt like relief before it felt like fear. I understood that immediately. We never spoke about destiny. We spoke about responsibility, about choosing when avoidance was no longer harmless, about how staying silent can be an action, even when it pretends not to be. Living across the hall eventually stopped being symbolic. It just became proximity, comfort, familiar sounds, the knowledge that someone else was making decisions with their eyes open. If I've learned anything from it, it's this. Some turning points don't announce themselves as love. They arrive as errands, as politeness, as a neighbor doing the reasonable thing. You think you're returning something that was lost, and only later do you understand. You were handing back a life that needed to be closed, so another one could finally open.